So I come from one of the greatest rabbis of the 2,000-year Jewish exile. His name is the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi
Mhm.
Eliyahu Kramer. And his students wrote a letter to find these lost tribes of Israel. Hundreds of years ago, they were looking for them.
Right, because originally there are 12 tribes of Israel.
12, yeah, let's get a little
Yeah,
context.
yeah.
12 tribes of Israel.
hmm
There was a unified kingdom. Then there became a civil war, basically. They weren't really fighting with each other, they just cut off ties. And the northern kingdom was 10 tribes, and the southern kingdom was Judea, 2 tribes. And so we're the descendants, us Jews, from the Judean kingdom, the southern kingdom. Jew comes from Judah.
This is right after King Solomon, right? The king's the
Yes,
civil
shortly
war.
after King
His
Solomon.
children,
Yeah, because the taxes for the temple were too high for the north, so they seceded.
Republicans.
Right, a big in terms of terminology, something I picked up from you was back then everyone was Israelites.
Yes, it was the house of
Jews were
Israel.
specifically from a specific tribe called Judea.
Well, the word
Or
Jew didn't
something
come
like
into
that.
reality yet.
Right.
But
We were the Israelite nation.
yes.
Made up of
So let's just for the general population that knows general history about this, you have the Egyptians, you have you have the Israelites. Israelites as slaves. They come out of Egypt, become a nation, independent, and then fast forward, establish a nation state of Israel. Right? Would it be called? Would it be safe to say
Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth? What?
A kingdom.
The kingdom of Israel
Yeah.
under King David. People know King David. People know King Solomon, and then everyone just starts to just get lost into the pages of history.
Correct.
So now we are at the Civil War period in which the children, the descendants of King Solomon, began to bicker.
Yes, the taxes for the temple were too high for the north, so they seceded, made their own temple, and they went into exile. The Assyrian army came and exiled, which the Assyrian army was known to do. It was more cost effective than just going to war. They exiled the northern 10 tribes towards the far east, and many of them ran into the north, and some hit the sea on ships. And the Judeans stayed in the first temple period still of King Solomon in Judea for another period of time afterwards, just by themselves, which is where the Jew started to become a reality.
And this
'cause
is
that was
two
all that was
tribes?
left.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, because it was Judah and Benjamin in the south. And you also had the tribe of Levi who lived amongst all the tribes because Levi didn't
That's where I'm
own. So we have a Levite with us right now. The Levites didn't own land in
Wash my
Israel.
hands.
So they didn't have their own place where they were just amongst everyone because they were the
Interspersed.
teachers.
Ah.
Yeah.
So this is actually, before we get into the controversial stuff, this is just cool Jewish history.
Super cool because especially the prophecies, back then said that one day we're going to unite in the future, and even the Vilna Gaon says it's a crucial unification to get to the redemption. So I just look at those prophecies as like a really good, Hail Mary that they threw up pass, and here we are in 2022 catching it.
The Hail Mary is an interesting choice of word there.
I know. I was like, is that a good word? Because
Because I don't know if we want to. We're going to confuse a lot.
know what?
A
I
lot
will-
of people confused.
I will say-
But so that's interesting. 10 tribes, historically, everyone agrees on this. This is not controversial. Are expelled or exiled. You are left with the 2 tribes of Judah and Benjamin together as Judea, that the modern term Jew comes from.
Yes.
And that's how we identify today, that the Jews of today are basically the ones that have a recognition are from Judea.
We're not even from that kingdom because that kingdom was sent into exile into Babylon. And then a small remnant of those Babylonians came back to Israel for the second Commonwealth to build the second temple.
Right.
And then we are the descendants of those individuals. So we're the descendants of the remnants of Judea. In the story of Purim, which happens during those 70 years that the Judeans are in Babylon, the kingdom of Achashverosh, the ruler at the time, he ruled from Africa to India and 127 provinces.
The Persian Empire.
Yes, 127 nations from Africa to India. And in each one of them, they were Israelites. They were people from the house of Israel. And they spoke different languages. How in a 70-year period can the Jewish people get to India and provinces in 127 nations? So it wasn't the Jews at that time he was also ruling over and trying to kill. It was the Israelites who were sent towards Afghanistan, who stretched all the way towards India, who were also in his rulership. And this is why it's one of the chapters in the book of Esther. It says the people were mit yahadim. A lot of people converted at that time. A mass conversion basically across the Silk Road from Africa to India. And we believe it wasn't just a conversion of people who wanted to become part of this. It was Israelites who adapted the Jewish way of thinking because they saw it was preserved from the courts of the Temple of Jerusalem.
They converted back into
Yes, and this
Judaism?
yeah,
Oh,
there were people that did that.
Well, back into there was a portion of the Israelites that kept that like I'm asking like kept sort of stricter. They kept the tradition alive while the 10 other tribes were unable to do that.
The Judeans, Judah specifically, was tasked by Jacob to keep the law, the scepter of the law, until the final redemption, till the end of days.
I like that with the scepter of the law. That's good.
Exactly.
That's just good.
And it says, the verse says, they'll hold the scepter of the law until Shiloh comes. And Shiloh is numerical value in the Torah of Mashiach, of Messiah. So we see that the Jewish people were responsible for the law until the Messiah comes.
Any relation to the city of Shiloh? There's only one line of Navi I ever remember. Elkanah went to Shiloh. And then I forgot the rest of the year.
Shiloh's a great place. I visited there. So yeah, basically to answer your question is we were the keepers of the law because we had the temple, we had the courts, and we had the law. And
we
brought
as descendants of the tribe of Judah.
Yes.
Of Judah.
Yeah.
What were the other ones, the other tribes tasked with? Do you know specifically?
I think a lot of them were just farming. You know, one tribe you have Issachar and Zevulun. One was learning, one was working. They were just living their best life, and the temple ruled over the law of the house of Israel.
Right.
The temple is what decided the laws, and that's where they, that's where it all went down.
How does this story play out with what we learned in sort of modern Jewish history with the Sadducees and the Pharisees and all of that stuff? Does that come way later in the timeline?
So that comes later.
And
that
that's
was
dealing still amongst Jews.
yes, that
right?
was inter-Judean beef
Right.
that was going on.
Inter-Judean beef.
Good name.
That's
for
a great. They
podcast.
serve inter-Judean beef at this Bukharian place. It's amazing. But so I'm fast forwarding because my brain. This is cool, and then my brain is kind of scrambling through the different timelines. But the modern term Jew, which we trace back to the tribe of Judah, and these tribes that we're talking about. I mean, the term Jew today is sort of an umbrella term that does encompass Jews from different parts of the world. So how is that distinct from the 10 lost tribes versus the recognized Jews of the world that are spread out geographically?
Such a good question and so relevant because really now what Jew really means now is the law that the Judeans preserved is being adopted, you know? So, as you mentioned Bukharian before, there's some theories that the Bukharians are such an old community. They were from the 10 tribes, from the first exile of the 10 tribes, not from the Judeans. And they had taken on the law of the Judeans when there was, you know, communication with the Babylonian yeshiva institutions, let's say in the year 700 or 800. That they said, okay, we'll take back the law. So if someone takes on the 613 commandments of the Torah and the law as preserved by the house of Judah, generation to generation, even until today to me, you've merged yourself into this thing called Judah. But at the end times, there's something called the unification between Judah and Israel. You may not even realize, but you say it every single day when you pray in Hebrew.
Don't make assumptions.
Hypothetically, you would say, if you were praying every morning, Tzur Yisrael kuma be'ezra Yisrael v'tei knumecha Yehuda v'Yisrael, that we pray for the unification between the house of Judah and the house of Israel. So when you have a tribe, let's say across the Silk Road, who says, we're from the house of Israel, you know, we don't say, oh, so you're Jewish. We'll say you could become Jewish if you join back to the law, and this is the kingdom of like David's law, so you're in. So that's like what's been happening throughout the exile. But we believe in the future there's going to be a greater unification where it's not individual conversions. There's going to be nations that are going to wake up and unite with us, and it's going to be a whole new reality and a whole new series of laws that are going to emerge from it. It's called the Messianic days, you know, and people may think you're kooky to say we're living in them, but who knows? There are Jews in India that come from the 1400s, from the Spanish Inquisition that made it there. So there's very recent, so to say.
Yeah.
That's more on the west coast of India. But then in the upper east corner, you have the Bnei Menashe, who are the children of Menashe. You know, they don't look like anyone, you know, they're Oriental looking. They don't look like what we'd recognize a Jew. But they say they're from the ancient house of Israel. So it's most likely that they're not just a bunch of people who learned about it and wanted to convert to it. The likelihood is what happened across the Silk Road 2,700 years ago, which we're talking about this now, is Well, first, let me just rewind. You look at the story of Esther and Joseph. These were two Israelites who, in two different time periods, who ended up in far-flung places of the world, one in Egypt and one in Babylon, and somehow rose to become influential and rose to become powerful. So the main base camp of the Israelite exiles now in Afghanistan, 2,700 years ago. And to get to India, there was travels across the Silk Road. It doesn't mean 10,000 Israelites showed up to northeast India and became a village there. It could have been one Israelite who was a good businessman on a journey with his friends, found his way to a village of these people,
Yeah.
and they saw that he was a very wise man, just like Pharaoh saw in Joseph, and said, why don't you come rule with me and help us restructure how we grow food and distribute wealth in this little microeconomy. And
It's too hot in here. Can we?
yeah, exactly. In
India.
and so yeah, this happened. It's like just taking a glass bottle and slamming it on the floor and just seeing how all the shards go everywhere.
Right.
So the Israelites from Afghanistan just started to travel across these Silk Roads, and that's why you see within 100 years of each other, the Pashtun are formed, where there are 40, 50 million people today that say they're from the House of Israel in Afghanistan. You have Buddhism that pops up within 100 years, and the Shintoism, which is the oldest monarchy in the world, whose whole temple and worship is structured around some King Solomon first temple looking stuff. So you see a cultural boom within 100 years of the tribes of Israel going towards the Far East. So for me, there's no smoke without a fire. Well, look at Japan. They're a 2,600-year-old kingdom, the oldest kingdom in the world, the oldest monarchy in the world. They have a holy temple today in Mount Moriah in Japan. Mount Moriah is the same mountain where the King Solomon's temple were. The Japan temple today has 3 chambers: an outer chamber people celebrate, inner chamber where priests do sacrifices, and an inner chamber where they keep a golden ark on 4 poles with golden birds on it, and they keep 3 things in their ark. And their priests there wear these little phylactery called yamabushi, wear these little phylactery-looking devices on their foreheads. And they claim to be an ancient nation who was chosen, had a chosen homeland. They were exiled from their land and reestablished their kingdom here. So when you look at the Silk Road, at who's saying they're...
You will never find a kosher restaurant without sushi.
That's the joke about the whole thing. But that doesn't mean I'm saying that 10,000 Israelites showed up to Japan. It means an Israelite must have reached there at a certain point of their exile, as we were commanded to do. We were supposed to go to the 4 corners of the world. That's what the verse says we were supposed to do.
What if someone said that's just sort of the structure of holy temples, and the Israelites took it from someone else?
By the way, Israelites left with a lot of things that were done in ancient Egypt. So that was the reason we went there in the first place, according to the Kabbalah. And this is where the psychedelic lecture comes in, because the reason we had to go into Egypt was to extract these things that they had of light that had fallen there. So
it's possible the Israelites did kind of co-opt it, but it doesn't mean that the Shinto wasn't a continuation.
This all stuff goes back to Adam, to the first man in these things. But the Israelites, we believe their purpose was to spread it across the Silk Road. And when you look at history, it does. And I'm not that type of guy to be like, oh, I think you are. I found this because the Japanese people themselves are reporting on TV that they think they're from the House of Israel because of the legends and the connection. So I was like, oh, now if you think you are, let's talk, because even if you are or if you're not, this is a great thing to unite us for world peace. So I didn't even care who is or isn't. It's not about converting or the right of return. It's about world peace.